I can. All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the January 18th, 2023 meeting of the Auburn School Committee. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. What I was trying to say. All right, the introductions down here to my right, please.
Dan Poisson, Ward 5.
Brian Belknap, Ward 4.
Clarissa Perez Armendariz, Ward 1.
Pam Hart, Ward 2.
Karen Matthew, Ward 3.
Connie Brown, Superintendent.
Pat Gaudier, at large.
Pamela Albert, at large.
Jillian Dumais, Student Representative.
Gabriel Desperado, Student Representative.
Mark Conrad, Business Manager.
Sue Doris, Assistant Superintendent.
All right, and Mayor Jason Levesque does have an excused absence this evening. Let's begin with approval of tonight's agenda, which includes the approval of the minutes from the January 14th meeting as well. Do I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Thank you, Brian. I have a second.
Second.
Thank you, Pam. Questions, comments, that one? All right, seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor? Motion passes. Thank you, everyone. All right, next item on the agenda is public participation. Do we have anyone here from the general public who would like to come and address the school committee this evening? Come on up to the podium, sir. Hello, the mic should be live. Can you tap on it for me? Wonderful, thank you. Can you begin by telling us your name and your affiliation with the school department, if any?
Mogolano, and my affiliation is I'm an Auburn taxpayer.
Absolutely, thank you.
So,
what can we do for you this evening?
I was here a year ago and with some problems, and apparently the problems are the same, if not even worse. So, first of all, I'd like to challenge everybody here to a little wager. I'll be in the hall 2 weeks from now at the next meeting, and I'll have 7 envelopes with $20 in them. And if you're willing to put $5 in there, and we'll seal it up, put your name on it. Now, we've got a brand new school with a brand new roof. If the roof leaks between 2 weeks from now and April 15th, you get to keep my 20. If the roof leaks, I get to keep your 5. You can decide. You got 2 weeks to do that. So next on my agenda is $7.5 million over budget. I can't imagine that. That's unbelievable. And I don't see any results. Now, what's aggravating to me is we passed a $16 million bond for an auditorium and other amenities, but we're going to be missing $7.5 million? That's ludicrous. It really is. So my last item is, and I talked about this last year, is the school buses. There was a problem last year, and you still have a problem. Now, they credit Isaac Newton with the definition of insanity, but it's really not him. But the definition of insanity is doing the same things over and over again, expecting a different result. And apparently, this is what you folks are doing. Last year, I came, and you did one thing. There was one person gone, but I recommended that you needed to clean house and start fresh. You didn't do it. So you're still having the same problems. You got a lack of drivers. And that's really costly, and I'm aware of the costliness, because when you send, I'm going to talk about sports trip. When you send a bus driver, if you have a full complement of bus drivers, and you send a bus driver to do a sports trip, let's say for 6 hours, your cost is about $450. When you rent out a school bus from someone else, it's $1,400. And if they don't have a school bus and they give you a coach, it's $1,600. How can you justify that kind of money? It's crazy. It's ludicrous. If you don't have a bus driver, you got to keep the kids home. I know it's a tough decision, but how can you spend that kind of money? It's crazy. So, another suggestion I'm going to make. Last year, when I surveyed the schools in the area, Leavitt and Turner and Brunswick both had a full complement of school bus drivers. They were fully staffed. So how hard would it be for somebody to pick up the phone and call? There was 2 ladies at the time, very nice ladies, and ask them what they're doing that you're not doing. It's pretty simple. They're doing something right, you guys aren't. And all you gotta do is pick up the phone and call. I'm sure they'll talk to you and find out what they're doing that you're not. I have one final comment. I hope I'm under the 3 minutes.
Go ahead, finish.
And I'm going to blame this crisis we have with the school and the budget and inflation on everybody here who voted for President Biden and his Green New Deal. So when you go home in the mirror tonight and look in the mirror, and if you voted for Biden, this problems we're having relates to everybody here. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, moving on. Presentation this evening, which will probably touch upon some of Mr. Galano's conversations, is the EL construction update. We have Harriman Associates here to have a conversation with us.
Very good. Thank you, and it's wonderful to join all of you. My name is Mark Lee, and I'm an architect with Harriman that's been working on this project alongside many of you in the room for several years. And we're here to provide an update on the where we are in the progress of the construction and the project overall. And so without further ado, the first series of slides is just for those of you who maybe have seen some of the images in the newspaper that's on the outside, and you maybe even seen some of the drone videos, but what's going on is a tremendous amount of activity on the interior, and it's really starting to take shape. And so the photo that we're looking at right here is what we call the student commons. It's really the center of the building, and we're looking towards the front entrance of the school. But you can see the level of finish that we're accomplishing inside of the building itself. We've got walls that are constructed. We've got a lot of the finishes that are now being installed, and even paint on some of the wall surfaces. And so you can see all the windows up. And so this also looks at what we call the community stair, which is a series of tiers that rise up from this common space, which acts as the cafeteria of the building. And that the tiered seating is a place just for students to sit and either eat or socialize or charge their devices. But it also acts as a stair going from the first level up to the second level. The next image looks at a typical classroom. So the contractor has really been focusing on the classroom wing of the school. And this shows a standard setup of the casework, the shelving units in the classroom. So the classrooms themselves are getting further along than anywhere else in the building, but you can see a counter and some upper cabinets and lower cabinets and the larger wardrobe units. This is a standard classroom. Just the wall to our left, there's some of the marker boards that are installed, lighting's installed. So really the classrooms are nearly complete. The ceilings are in, the lighting's up, and so that's pretty far along in that development. This image is showing a connector. The building is organized with the classrooms in various pods or academic villages, and this is the connector between two of those classroom communities. And so this has a window that looks out onto the courtyard, which is to the left, and allows a lot of natural light to spill in, and this will be another area for students to study outside of the classroom itself, so and intended as an informal learning space. You can also see the wall finishes. There's a tile wainscot that you can see in the multicolored tiles on the corridor wall, and so that's to provide resistance to abuse as students move back and forth along the hallway. And then a couple images of the auditorium taking shape. So this is a little bit further delayed than the classroom, but we're starting to make a lot of progress. So the image on the left is the area directly in front of the stage. So that lift that we see is working on an area right at the stage opening. That's a proscenium opening we can see there. And then we can see the sloped floor that comes up to the center aisle. And so we're looking down at the the front portion of the auditorium. And then from that center aisle backwards is the right-hand image. And so you can see the tiers that will have seating on the main level, but then you can see the balcony, which also has tiered seating behind it. And then we're starting to see the ceiling installed as well. So they've been spending weeks and weeks in there hanging drywall, and we're now getting to the point where they're just starting to put some of the finishes inside the auditorium space itself, but that's coming along nicely. This space is at the front of the building. It's known as the auxiliary gym, and so it's one of the two gymnasiums, the smaller one. It's really intended as the multi-purpose space, so you can see that the walls are framed in, and we have some construction material that's staged on the floor, but the space is really taking shape. We're kind of located right at the entrance to that auxiliary gym, looking across it and looking out to the front of the building. And then speaking of the front of the building, this is the area of the front of the building that looks over at the classroom wing. So that's the part of the building, the new construction that's over on the left-hand side, that you can see the existing school in the background. You can see the gymnasium corner of the existing gym that's kind of just poking out from the left-hand side of the image. And then the classroom wing extends from the 3-story to a 2-story connector over to the front entrance. And the materials you see are the brick that comprises the majority of the exterior. And then there's the darker gray metal panel, and then the windows themselves. And then the entrance itself, so if anyone has driven up to the site, this is looking at what will become the new main entrance for Edward Little. And it's right now still got a lot of the temporary construction plywood securing the lower entrance, but you can see where the administration offices will be right on the corner. Also in plywood right now, just waiting for that the glazing to come in. And then there's the upper portion above that canopy roof that also houses a couple of conference rooms that look out onto the front. And then to the left of this is a stairwell that takes you from the first level up to the second level. And looking at, just to give everyone kind of a context of where we are in construction, so this is the site itself, and the purple area that's identified as Phase 1 is the area that the contractor has been working on. That's primarily focusing on the construction of the new school building that's shown in that green with the A, B, C, D, E, F. So that's the new construction. You can see how it's constructed right up against the existing school, which is in that reddish color that has a Phase 4 on top of it. And so it's kind of tucked right in there. And the construction of not only the school itself, but also the parking lot, the primary parking lot to the front of the building, and then the access drive that comes in off of Western Ave. And so there's a kind of a line that separates Phase 1 from the Phase 2, 3, 4, and 5. And the after the first phase is done and the new school is built, the idea is that the contractor will take the second, sort of flip the site, and they'll take control of the other half of the site. They've already actually begun working on, the site contractor's already started to work on some of Phase 2 and 3, and you've probably seen that if you've been near this school. You can see the softball field is really in that Phase 2 area where that we used to have that rocky knoll outside of the main drop-off loop, and then the track in Phase 3. So some of that work has already begun. So the idea, again, is that when the construction of the school is done, we'll turn it around. People will access from Western Ave, and and be able to access the new building. And then the area that we're looking at for the transition for the phases is impacted by the demolition. So the intent is the school gets completed, then we tear down the existing building, and then we sort of flip that, and that's anticipated to happen and this summer, so that in the fall the new school is up and running. The one area that we're still looking at carefully with a schedule that may be impacted by some of this is the demolition of the existing building. And so right now we're looking at some of the hazardous materials that are part of the existing building and how that may impact the schedule of when we can tear that down. And so the contractor and the Department of Education and the owner's team are looking carefully at that, but they may have an impact as to when we can take down the existing building. And then the layout of the school is shown here. The main entrance is at the top of the page. It's in the pink area between, it's just on the edge of the A wing, right before the blue area. And so that area right there is coming along the furthest. So the A and D wings are really that classroom wing, and those photos that we saw of how advanced that was. And then the contractor's progressing from that right-hand side all the way to the left-hand side. The area C and F are the ones that are furthest behind, but they're also the least intensive in terms of the amount of work that's required. So the phasing of the construction is actually working nicely. So and then the auditorium is sort of right in the middle, and the athletics, and then the career technology wing to the left coming along. One of the activities that's also going on outside of the construction is the development of the furniture package. So thinking about all the furniture that has to be conceived of and organized, the orders for it, and then soliciting pricing from from vendors to do that. And Mr. Conrad and others have been working diligently on inventorying what you have that you can reuse. And then also looking at what are the needs of the spaces. And right now that's been assembled and is being reviewed by the Department of Education to enable us to go out to bid for that. And so we're hopeful we can get any day now the sort of their blessing, and that'll allow us to move to the next phase, which is to solicit pricing for that. So important to allow enough time to be able to get that and procure the bids and then get the materials on site for the start of the school. Just a real quick overview of the project budget itself. And so the Department of Education, at the very time that we had the bids and then we awarded the contract, we updated the project budget, and that's essentially these line items that we see here that we track the expenditures on. And a couple things to note are that we're sort of approximately at the time that this was done, and this was at the end of December, that we were about 60% done in terms of what we paid for on the contract to the contractor, the general contractor construction contract. We're actually a little bit further ahead in that than that now, and that encompasses both the site and the school. So the school itself is closer to somewhere probably around 75 or so percent, and so at this present time. So there's a tremendous amount of work going on both on the site and the school, but remember also that the site contract extends past the completion of the school by about a year. And then the biggest items that we have yet to expend in the administrative cost and reserve really are there's the movable equipment or the furniture piece that we just spoke about. And so that's a line item that's about $3.6 million. And so there's a fair amount that will be spent in the not too distant future on that. And then project contingency is another line item that we look at carefully, and that's line item 7. And that we track the unforeseen conditions or changes that are desired or needed throughout the project itself. That is about, at the time of this snapshot, it was about 12%, which is pretty good, tracking the overall development of the project at around 60%. So it's looking pretty healthy. And again, that's what that line item is for, is to have that those funds that we need to cover unanticipated expenditures in the project. And then the remainder of fees and services are at about 85% at this time. And so those are largely the fees, the professional service fees for the architects and construction testing companies and the like. And so that gives you kind of an overall view of just where we are with the project budget. There are two items that I think have become a area of concern that's been brought forward, and I'll touch on them briefly. but they deal with the hazardous materials, and in particular, the PCB costs. And right now, we are still working to solidify or get a better sense of exactly what those costs are. But those costs are largely associated with sealant that contain PCBs in the original construction. And a lot of it is the cost associated with the area around the gymnasium, and it has to do with the complexity of removing the areas that are contaminated. Large columns, concrete columns that are not easily separated by because they act in a structural capacity. So we have to demolish those, and it's a lot of very large pieces that weigh a lot of money, and that has to be disposed of in a particular way. And so the costs associated with the demolition and then transportation and disposal of those are significant. Right now, we estimate that is somewhere around the $4 million mark for the total cost of the abatement of hazardous materials. And not all of that was projected at the time that the project budget was created. And so that's an area that we're, again, working carefully with the state to understand how to cover those costs. The second item is cost escalation. The construction market has been volatile, to say the least, in the last couple of years. And so material costs, labor shortages have all impacted construction costs, and they exceed what sort of most years have seen in the way of escalation or cost increases. And so a number of subcontractors to the general contractor have come forward and said that the prices have well exceeded what they anticipated, and so they are petitioning for relief on what those cost increases are. Those costs have been forwarded from the general contractor, and there's been a lot of conversations with the Department of Education. It's important to note that the contract is a fixed price contract, and so the contractor that we're dealing with submitted a price for it, and it was all inclusive of everything that's shown on the construction documents, and so there is no escalation clause in that contract. And so right now it's more of a conversation than anything else in terms of what this is, but there hasn't been anything definitive in terms of a resolution or an action for an outcome for that. So that's an ongoing conversation, but they have submitted costs on a number of the subcontractors and just passed those along, and those total probably just around the $4 million mark as well. But those are just information that's been shared or passed on from subcontractors that are bringing forth costs that they feel that they couldn't have anticipated when they bid the project. And that's the update, if you will, right now. So available for any questions or.
So I'm going to open this up to questions. I know that for those of us who attended the building committee, it went a lot more in depth, and I want to make sure the school committee members have the same information that those of us on the school committee, on the building committee had. So Pat, do you have a question?
I know we talked about it last week, but the contingency plan, what's the legal issue with not being able to use those monies towards this?
Yeah, so the most recent information that we've been given from the Department of Education's school construction group is that the contingency that we saw in the project budget slide is there for change orders that are an increase in the scope of the work. And so the conversation has been that this is not a change in the scope of work, that the same scope of work is there. And so they have said that that's not a cost that the contingency would be used for. So, Mark, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to that.
Yes, and essentially they see this as a fixed price contract. There is no provision in the contract for changes in the price as raw materials went up, which is different from other types of state contracts that may be in place in other areas like constructing roads, but this is a fixed price contract by the language of the contract.
Pam?
So, majority of the time when someone comes in and does a job, they set a certain amount of, like, if there is inflation, or a certain amount of money aside if there is inflation and stuff. Part of our contract, did they do that and it's just exceeded that? Like,
Yeah, so there's, from the material they've submitted, seemingly that, yeah, they anticipated that there would be some degree of cost increase. But what they have said is that there was no way they could have anticipated the steep increases that they have seen and particularly there's several items. Steel, for instance, was one item that saw a significant increase in cost, more than normal 5% or so every year. And so when it's tricky because the subcontractor is trying to be as competitive as they can be to get the job, and so they're trying to hedge, okay, where that is. But absent having an insurance policy, they just have to go with their best information to price the job that's going to take several years to complete.
so as part of a contract, if they've set an amount of money that they're supposed to have, are they culpable for that? I mean, because they're saying they don't want to do the job, or would not do the job, but are unable to. But as a contract, aren't they to be held to that?
Correct. The general contractor has a contract with those subcontractors to perform the services and it's very explicit what the requirements are for that subcontractor to perform. If they wish not to, the general contractor can go after them. If they're bonded, they can seek the compensation, or they can seek the bond company of the subcontractor to come in and complete the work if the subcontractor walks away from the work. So there's a level of protection for the general contractor. The Auburn School Department and the state have the general contractor is bonded, and so in some ways this sort of is an issue between the general contractor and the subcontractors. And not between the school and the one contract it owns, which is the contract with the general contractor. I don't know, Pam, if that answered your question or not. But, okay.
So, Mark, at the last building committee meeting, we talked about particular vendors. We were given lists of particular vendors who were either holding product, who were not going to be delivering on equipment, who were just generally saying, we can no longer afford to do this job. So you are saying that at this point, that's between the contractor and the subcontractors?
That is the way that the contract is, because essentially we have or you have one contract with a general contractor, and that general contractor is responsible for delivering the plans, the building itself, to the school department, and so. So I think there's a certain level of risk that the general contractor has in signing subcontractors, but that risk is owned by the general contractor.
Okay, and I know under Dr. Brown's report, she's going to speak to, Mark, you alluded to, the school department has had conversations with the DOE and where we're at with the DOE. Dr. Brown will allude to that a little bit in her several meetings that she has had with the Department of Education along with Mark. However, at this point, the building is 75% built. There is not an opportunity at this point to go back and start slashing things. Things have been decided upon. We are too far in to make decisions about, in essence, called value engineering, when you were starting to cut product or cut things over here. Okay, so at this point,
excuse me, Karen. And then the issue would be whose responsibility it is to absorb the cost that you're trying to offset with the reductions too. And I don't know that that's been established, that it's your responsibility to reduce scope to offset an increase in cost.
So, and let me get, and if I'm misspeaking, please let me know. But the citizens of Auburn own 12% of this project as far as the financing goes, where the rest, the 88%, is the state. We've bonded with the state for 88%. Mark's nodding his head.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. I think the only other kind of point that I wanted to make in here is that Dr. Brown has done a lot of legwork to try to, and I would say go above and beyond the job description of a superintendent, certainly to try to rectify some of these situations for the citizens of Auburn and to get this building open on time and on the budget that was agreed upon. So with that, if there are no other questions, I was going to say I don't have Dr. Brown allude in, but go ahead, Pam.
I have one question just about the hazardous material cost, removal of that. And how did that discrepancy come about from, was it just we were unaware of how much hazardous material was in the old building at the time that this was budgeted? Because, I mean, $3.5 million is a
Big jump from the
It's a huge
600,000.
jump from
that was-
600,000, so I'm
and that's
trying
on
to
the low
understand.
side. 3.5 is on the low side.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand
Yeah, and
how that was missed.
Sure, absolutely. I'll start it. I'm not an expert on hazardous materials, but so what we do is we can do a degree of testing to understand the extent of what might be hazardous. But what we don't do is submit a remediation plan to the EPA, which is a requirement. It's only through understanding that degree of the problem or how to address it, the remediation, that you fully understand the cost associated with it. And so there was a level undertaken to understand the extent of the material that we had, but an action plan for disposition of it was something that was not part of and can't be part of at the time that we have to make the assumption. So, Mark.
I can add to that. As you know, I was involved in the Mount Ararat High School project a few years ago. That was at least $1 million over budget for PCB. So to Mr. Lee's point, you actually have a systemic issue in that we can't estimate the costs prior to going to referendum when you have a budget in front of the voters because of the cost and the time it takes to get to an approved EPA plan, which is what really drives the cost. And that's why we've worked with Senator Rotundo to create a legislation for a statewide fund for demolition of schools, for school construction projects, because I think this is going to be repeated over and over, where you can't estimate the costs to the degree you need to before you go to referendum. So you either risk underfunding it, as we have here, or overbonding the project when you're left with hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars because you didn't need it. So this is a state-level issue that's going to be repeated again and again, I think, unless there's a better mechanism to resolve the financial side of it.
And we're probably unique in that we're building on the exact same site. If the school was on a different site, it wouldn't necessarily, I mean, we'd still have to remove it and abate it, but it wouldn't necessarily hold up the opening of the new building.
Yeah, to that point, if you were selling a property or if it was being turned over, it wouldn't necessarily be part of the project. But because you're tearing down the building as part of this project, it's part of the cost.
And I did ask at the building committee, can the existing building stay and we open this building? And I think the question was sort of shocking to some people. I'm trying to think outside of the box, but it affects parking and it affects some of the fields, I believe. It just really is, it can't stay. Essentially can't stay for us to continue down the same path. Fields, parking, bus loops, all of that. It creates a whole other set of problems. Because my answer was just leave it there then. That was mine. Pat?
All right, this might be something you can't answer right now, but particularly in reference to the gentleman that was here, who is obviously reflecting a lot of, maybe some of the feelings in the community. If we're responsible for 11 or 12%, does that mean that this $7 million is only going to be on our side for 11% of that? Or are we going to possibly end up having to foot that whole bill?
I think right now, it's just been conversation. So the idea that we know whose responsibility the overage is, it's still too preliminary to know that. What we know is that the contractor signed a fixed price contract to deliver the school, and that's materially what we do know. That's not at question, and so I don't know that anyone can say right now what the percentages of what a cost increase would be. For the construction cost increases we're talking about. For the remediation, that's a different conversation regarding the split of responsibility for that. And I don't know how it worked out at Mount Ararat, Mark, with the cost, increased cost for that.
Yeah, in that instance, they had sufficient contingency funds to handle the overdraft. I think the difficulty here has been you have both the cost escalation and the PCB abatement costs, and you're looking at very different issues, perhaps with very different resolutions over time, but together they exceed the contingency.
Pam?
So you talked about the project contingency, sorry, and you said that we can't use it for either of these issues, but are you saying that the Mount Ararat, were able to use the
Yeah, go ahead,
PCB
Mark, and, yeah.
for, you were able to use the contingency
think-
fund for that?
I think the other mark was referring to the cost escalation.
Correct.
There would be nothing preventing the PCB cost from being funded through contingency funds potentially with approval from the DOE.
Right.
All right, so we could potentially use the project contingency money
I think
for the abatement.
There's precedent in them using contingency funds for the PCB.
For
Yeah.
PCB, but not for the overages.
Well, that's half the problem. Thank you.
Yeah, we're trying. All right, any other questions for Mark? All right,
Thank you.
seeing none. Thank you very much, Mark. And that leads into Dr. Brown's superintendent report. Some of what Mark was alluding to when he said that the department has had conversations with the DOE, the department being Dr. Brown and Mark. I believe Scott and Air may have joined in some of those meetings as well. But you have a letter that Dr. Brown has written to Commissioner Macon. I was asked who Commissioner Macon was, and she is the Commissioner of Education for the state of Maine. So with all that said, Dr. Brown, I will let you fill everyone in on all the work you've been doing behind the scenes to get this rectified.
Thank you. Before I start with that, I'd like to introduce Dave Lewis. So Dave, if you wouldn't mind just waving. Dave is our owner's representative and has been at all the meetings and is really our eyes and ears on the project. So Dave, thank you for coming tonight. We appreciate you that you're here. So for the last 2 years, we've been attending, either Dave and I, Mark and I, or all three of us, construction meetings. And those meetings enjoy a full complement of the architect, the owner's rep, the owner, who is us, the Department of Education, the GC, and that would be Arthur Dudley himself, who attends many of these meetings. And so we have kept them appraised of every development along the way. And so the department goes back to the people that they report to, and I would posit that includes the commissioner regarding the progress of this particular project. So I think it's important that this is not something that came out of nowhere. So Mark Conrad, got quite concerned about this and asked to meet personally with the commissioner in August, and did. And we met with Commissioner Macon and Scott Brown, who is the Director of School Construction and Facilities, Capital Improvements, and they told us in fairly certain terms that this was a fixed price contract and that we would need to start thinking about the escalation charges in a way that they were unprepared to help us with. At the time, we did not know what the abatement costs would be for the PCB removal. That figure did not come in until the end of December. So we then started meeting with other people, and in November, I met with, again, representatives from the Maine Department of Education, Elaine Clark, who is the Associate Commissioner for DAS, which is the Division of Administrative and Finances, and asked again, we need some help here, folks. We need at least a response about what you see as the way forward. And so then we met again with the commissioner's staff in December, same question, and it's getting frustrating because the answer that we get is, well, put your questions in writing, which we've done, and it appears that the interest and the appetite for the department to solve our problem, because it is, as pointed out correctly, 88% their problem as well, needs to be addressed. And so that led to the letter that you have a copy of. And just to paraphrase some of the options, we did not go to the department without suggestions. We put in front of them what I think are multiple clear paths about how we might address these issues. And among those clear paths, we asked if we should go back to the State Board of Education. In the construction process, you have to go to the State Board of Education for funding. You did that when you had the project approved initially. Failing that, would they support The legislation is submitted by Senator Rotundo. Auburn City Manager Phil Crowell was extremely helpful in securing her assistance, and I worked with her to create a bill title. It was submitted before cloture, which was December 30, regarding the PCB abatement. As Mark Conrad has correctly stated, this is not just an Auburn problem. This is a statewide problem that needs to have some forward-looking thought given to it, because this is not the first time or the last time that the state is going to be dealing with this. And therefore, the prudent way forward, in my opinion, is to create some sort of sinking fund that would allow school districts to apply for, that would be operated comparable to probably the capital improvement projects, and then you could apply for that for your PCB abatement. Because as the other Mark pointed out, there's no way to know that cost, and it's not insignificant. We're talking astronomical dollars that impact projects going forward. So I asked if she would support that. And then I also asked if the department had suggestions regarding how we should deal with the escalation charges. And so that's the letter that you have in front of you. The department acknowledged receipt of my letter, but that is all. So we are still waiting to find out whether they see any or all of the options that I have put in front of them as feasible. So we'll see where that goes. As Mark Conrad pointed out, the timeline, the clock is ticking on this. We're supposed to move into this building July 1st. And we are now in the process of securing furniture. And it might make you laugh to think about all the things that have to be thought of, but right down to wastebaskets and flags have to be ordered for this place. And so the actual move is scheduled to take place over the summer in July, but we need to know now if that's going to be put off. And that's the conversation. I've asked Mr. Dudley to have a meeting with us next week on Monday, and I need to get from him the timeline if he sees that there are going to be delays with that. And so Dave and Mark are going to need your help with that, because this is going to be a very frank conversation regarding turning over that school. We will also explore the options that we have in the contract regarding liquidated damages for not turning over the building on time. We will explore with him the possibility of the performance bond that he has taken out in order to secure it. That's not a route that I'd like to go down, because that inevitably will delay the opening of that school.
Dr. Brown, can you elaborate on, for folks who don't know, what calling in the bond might mean, the performance bond?
So, required by state law, when you build a project, you need to secure an insurance company for the work, essentially. And that means that there's someone behind Mr. Dudley who is saying that they will secure his obligation to the Auburn School Department. And so they have done that. And when there are vendors who have communicated to Mr. Lewis and to us, who are called subs for him, that they refuse to do work, that impacts our school. It impacts our project. And that we have now been told that there are people who are refusing to work because they're not getting paid. And we, as the owner, need to take some fairly perhaps controversial steps forward about what we can do to address those concerns. We have tried to be a very good partner. We've tried to work collaboratively. But as I said, we're now at the point where push has got to come to shove, because we need to know if the building will open. We need to know when. We need to know what the delays are. And we need to know what Mr. Dudley is prepared to pay his subs. So that's part of the conversation.
And this is a meeting you have coming up on Monday?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
So that's my report. Be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Dr. Brown?
I do want to show you a great video.
So I would say stay tuned, ladies and gentlemen. We'll get another update as soon as Dr. Brown has that meeting with Arthur Dudley.
So I don't know why it doesn't have any sound.
Ooh.
Hi, my name is Connie Brown, and I am the superintendent for the Auburn School Department.
It is my great pleasure to introduce a video of the new Edward Little High School scheduled to open this summer, which is summer 2023. There's been a phenomenal amount of work completed on the new school, and we have great shots to show you of both the inside and the outside of the building. We hope that we will have an open house for everyone late in the summer, and that the school will be open for the beginning of the 23-24 school year. Enjoy.
Dr. Brown, is there anything that we or the public can do to help your cause with the the Department of Education?
It's a great question. So one of the things that I would encourage you to do is to call your local legislator and offer support for the bill that Senator Rotundo has submitted. I haven't seen the text of the bill yet, and I don't know what committee it will go to, but invariably it will be assigned to a committee at the legislature, and then we can call the committee members and encourage them to support this legislation. Senator Rotundo is the chairperson of the Appropriations Committee, which puts her in an excellent position to support legislation like this.
Great question, Pam. Clarissa, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to know if the nature of the escalation costs is in labor and things, or is it in things that it was always known we needed, and we've known cost projections were escalating for enough time that they could have been purchased earlier?
I'm going to ask Dave Lewis or Mark to answer that question, please.
Yeah, the cost escalations or cost increases that are being submitted are for materials only. And as Mark mentioned, or one of the Marks mentioned, the subcontractors say they carried a certain amount of anticipated inflation in their pricing, and this is above and beyond anything they anticipated.
Pam,
To
go ahead.
piggyback on that, though, was there a way that they could have purchased or had at least foreseen the purchase of the materials they needed before they escalated in price?
A lot of the subcontractors did purchase material in advance, just as soon as they got their contracts. Things like roof insulation. There was a city block-sized pile of roof insulation on site for months. They ordered that in advance. Roofing material was ordered in advance. So a lot of the subs were able to seize the opportunity and order in advance.
But from the building, that question was brought up at the building committee meeting as well, but there are some products that just couldn't be, for instance, the drywall. The roofers could purchase the materials and leave them outside in a section of the Edward Little area untouched and just off to the side, but you can't do the same with sheetrock, right? The contractor had no place to store that much sheetrock, and so was not able to purchase it that far in advance.
Yeah, any of the finished materials
Right.
couldn't be purchased in advance.
Yep. Any questions? Any other questions or comments? All right, go ahead, Dr. Brown.
So I do have one more thing, and I want to ask Gabe what the snow day calculator says for Friday. This is how I base my decisions.
And then, Gabe, you want to ask her if you're going to get the phone call Thursday night or Friday morning.
Yeah, honestly, that decision's
tell you
up
when
to
I get mine,
you. You're the one who makes that one, not the snow day calculator, but it is fairly accurate.
And I know I watched the weather before I came here, and it says it's going to come in around midnight, Thursday,
go.
Friday morning, so.
According to WMTW, we are going to get a snow day. Hopefully.
All right.
Thank
Apparently,
you.
we do have a committee taxpayer who's doing bets out in the back there, so maybe you can go join in on that bet. All right, everyone, moving on. No chairperson's report this evening. Mr. Mayor is not here, so no city council updates. So at this time, we are moving on to committee reports, and the agendas and minutes are there. Would any committee members care to highlight anything that happened at their committee meetings?
Yeah, I got one, Karen.
Oh, yep, Brian?
Yeah, so I'm kind of, so from a finance committee perspective, filling in for the mayor. Obviously, he's not here. We obviously had a whole lot of discussions about the construction project, which you guys have all heard about. One of the other things that I wanted to point out, not only to the committee, but also just for transparency to the public. One of the things that Dr. Brown brought to us, as we all know, we've had a whole lot of vacant positions for a while. We've had trouble filling them. We've tried to fill them, repeated attempts, and have not filled a lot of positions. So one of the things that Dr. Brown brought to the Finance Committee and was approved with the last meeting, we have now frozen almost 75%, maybe 70 to 75% of those open positions. There are a few that we've deemed, critical. Dr. Brown had kind of prioritized them and said, these are the handful that we need to keep. We'd really like to fill them. We're going to continue to try to fill those, but the others are actually on hold. What that equates to, and what's going to be, obviously we all know, is it's going to be a really, really tough budget season, probably one of the toughest in my terms, is for those positions that are vacant, it's about $835,000 that will be used to, correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Brown, but offset some of the other costs that are coming from a budget perspective. So I just thought that was, I wanted to illustrate that we are, that we are taking attempts, obviously from a budget perspective, but also transparency that, we have had to freeze these positions. I know Dr. Brown has communicated with all her staff and so forth, but that most positions now are frozen, at least for the time period.
Not all. Not all. All right.
Not all positions are frozen.
No, there's a handful, and it's in the memo that Dr. Brown provided. There's a handful of 10 or 12 positions that we're keeping open, hoping to fill.
Yep, great. Any other committee members need to chime in? All right, moving on. Let's go to no old business this evening. Moving on to new business, can I entertain a motion to request a waiver for an instructional day for Sherwood Heights Elementary School for its closure on December 1st, 2022 because of loss of power for the entire day? Do I have a motion?
So moved. Second.
Holy cow. Okay. Pam, I'll do you first. Brian, second. Any questions? This is new from my understanding, this is new from the DOE. So we had one building in the entire district who could not operate because of loss of power. Typically, that would just be waived through the school department itself, but now the DOE has just recently requested it needs to be waived by the school committee. Is that correct, Dr. Brown?
The Maine Department sent out a priority notice, and in it was the process for requesting a waiver if you had to close a school for a day and lost that instructional time. So that's what, and it has to be the school committee that requests that.
Okay, so that's new. This is a new agenda item. I don't think it's ever been on the agenda, at least in my time here. All right, any other questions or comments on that one? All right, seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor? Motion passes. All right, upcoming meetings are listed below. Any future agenda items or requests for information at this time? All right, seeing none, I need to entertain a motion to enter into executive session pursuant to 1 MRSA 4056A for the purpose of the evaluation of the superintendent. Do I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Thank you, Brian. I have a second.
Second.
Thank you, Pam Albert. All right, all those in favor to enter executive session? Thank you. We are now in executive session, 6:54 p.m.